Welcome back to Beyond the Numbers, where we break down the financial issues that matter for globally mobile families. Today's episode is a big one, and honestly, one of the most anticipated subjects in the UK this year. The UK Autumn Budget 2025 has finally landed, and this was Rachel Reeves' first full budget as Chancellor. For weeks, we've had speculations and leaks, everything from possible wealth taxes, from changes for non-DOMs, to predictions about pension reform and property taxes. We've seen the announced changes to higher taxes on rental income, new annual property charges, new rules around national insurance for anyone building a UK state pension from overseas, and even new considerations for internationally mobile individuals thinking about inheritance tax or returning to the UK tax efficiently. For British expats living in Singapore, Hong Kong, the UAE, or anywhere abroad, or anyone with UK assets or financial ties, this budget will have an impact on your financial planning. Even if you're not paying day-to-day UK tax, you still may have a UK property you're renting out, your savings or investments generating UK income, maybe a pension or a future state pension entitlement, or a long-term plan to return to or retire in the UK at some point. We're going to unpack the budget in the simplest possible terms, talk through what's actually changing, and explore what this could mean for your immediate finances, your long-term wealth plans, and your retirement ambitions, whatever and wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted to be joined by someone who can make sense of this better than anyone. Tony Müdd, Director of Third-Party Products and Services, based in our London office. And he spent days with his team analysing how these rules may play out for expats, returning residents, and anyone with UK financial ties. Tony's been with St James's Place for over 32 years and plays an essential role in our ability to provide full, holistic financial advice to our clients. Tony, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. That was quite a build-up.
Yeah. So let's dive straight in. Let's go first into a few questions about the UK Autumn Budget. What was your initial reaction to the UK Autumn Budget? And be honest, were you expecting these changes or were there any surprises for you?
I think, as you've sort of articulated already, the reality is it would have been really difficult for there to be surprises. I've been looking at budgets now for probably 2 decades, and I have never seen so much speculation and rumours. I mean, in part that's because the budget was as late as it's ever been. But I think as much as we are always used to what we sort of call flying kites, which is the idea of putting something out and engaging public opinion, that always happens, but not to the extent that we've had it this year. I mean, even to the point where the Speaker of the House actually sort of frankly told both the Chancellor and the Treasury off for doing it. So it would have been difficult for there to be surprises. Some of the things were absolutely nailed on. The changes to ISAs, the mansion tax, or so-called, the pension salary sacrifice, and the freezing of allowance, all those we pretty much 99% knew were going to happen. I think if there was a surprise, it was the things that she didn't say. So, for example, there's been huge amounts of debate and criticism around the changes she announced last year, the changes to away from domicile regime to the long-term residence regime.
Yeah.
The changes IHT on pensions, which has gone down particularly badly. Yeah. And of course, the change to agricultural property relief and business relief for entrepreneurs, where the 100% exemption has now been limited to £1 million. All of those things, I think a lot of us thought that she'd rail back, but she didn't. Yeah. And I think the one thing that has meant is that we're pretty sure now all of those things are going to hit us.
Yeah, you're right. I think the last budget came with a few shocks that didn't go down so well, so maybe not so many this time around. And, after last year's changes, including, like you mentioned, the overhaul of non-dom rules and, the new residence-based IHT, do you think UK expats or, globally mobile investors have had a chance to recover or adapt yet? And do you think that this new budget will create an even greater impact?
I mean, the reality is some people absolutely have made decisions because we've provided advice and I've helped in some ways. Others absolutely haven't. I mean, everyone takes their own time to do what will for a lot of people be quite substantial and really big decisions for them. Some people react quickly, others quite understandably want to take their time and relax. Will this budget have the same impact? Absolutely not. Other than, as I've already said, given the fact that she's had so much criticism and we thought that she might soften some of them or make some concessions, the fact that she hasn't, I think, puts us in the place of we probably should be looking as much at what happened last year as what's happened this year.
Yeah. So it's really doubling down on kind of the new advice that we've been giving to clients because of the new changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned at the beginning about some changes in property. That was a really big theme for this budget announcement. What's happening to rental income tax for non-residents, and how does the new annual property charge, or like you mentioned, the mansion tax, work?
Yeah, there's two things there. First of all, the income tax, actually that's not really a change other than the fact that actually the Chancellor has added another 2% onto the income.
Yeah.
She's done that along with dividends and savings income. And the idea is to align it with unearned income with earned income. Earned income in the UK comes with national insurance contributions, unless you're over a certain age, but unearned income never did. So what she's basically trying to say is, I'm going to add on an extra 2% to counter the fact that we're not getting NI. And that sort of makes sense, but it does increase the complexity. When it comes to the so-called mansion tax, the reality is that's a totally political move. I think that's a sop to the backbenchers who wanted the wealth tax. Right?
Yeah.
The wealth tax was never going to happen. And it was never going to happen because every advisor, I know this for a fact, that she asked, can we make it work, said no. Right? The infrastructure alone to put a wealth tax in place would probably cost more than the revenue they're going to raise. Yeah. And there isn't a country in the world where it actually works in a way that doesn't drive capital and people out of the country. Now, what they've done is they've just basically said, we're going to introduce a new levy on effectively a council tax surcharge, which is a flat rate of £2,500 for properties over 2 million, raising up to £7,500 for properties over £5 million. It's only, and I say only, 400 million. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not a great deal of money. So I think that's just a sort of, yes, I listen to you. We can't do a wealth tax, but we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Depending on what numbers you look at, it's going to affect something like 80,000, maybe 140,000 people, depending on whose numbers you look. But it's not a big thing.
So it's kind of appeasing for the political reasons more than anything else.
I think pretty clear, yes.
Yeah. And what do some of these changes around property, for example, mean for expats who still own homes, or, we have some clients who are foreign nationals that have investment properties in the UK?
Yeah, the rules, which we haven't got the details of yet, but actually don't differentiate between expats who may return or may not, or foreign nationals. The levy is still there. They will have to pay it. And the interesting thing is how they will make them pay it, because they don't have jurisdiction necessarily on a foreign national.
Yeah.
But that will be interesting to see when we do get the final rules.
I see. Okay. Let's move on a little bit to pensions and national insurance contributions, because that was brought up in the budget. Another impactful headline for expats was the change in national insurance. Do you mind breaking down what's happening to voluntary national insurance from 2026?
Yeah, it's pretty silly, pretty easy, really. From April 2026, a non-resident will not be able to use Class 2 voluntary national contributions to effectively buy missing years from their pension. So in order to get full UK state pension, which is currently just over £12,000, you have to have effectively contributed for 35 years. And the calculation, if you haven't, is really simple, because if you've only contributed for 20 years, say, you get 20/35ths of the state pension.
Yeah.
And you've always been able to make voluntary contributions Class 2 to if you like, fill up those gaps, missing years. What the Chancellor has said, and in fairness, without wishing to upset anyone who may be listening, she's probably got a point, because it's so cheap to do it.
It really is, yeah.
I mean, it's probably one of the best investments you'll ever make. And she's basically addressing the, as she described it, inequalities. So from April, you will not be able to do it anymore. You will be able to do Class 3 national insurance contributions, provided you've got at least 10 years worth of contributions at the moment. The only problem with Class 3 is it's 5 times more expensive for exactly the same benefit as you were getting under Class 2.
Yeah. It's a real pity, isn't it? Because that was, I think, one of the easiest things to help clients with who are expats is tell them to do their national insurance contributions, because it was so cheap. Not the case anymore then.
Not anymore.
So that's a bit disappointing. And what does it mean for anyone planning to build or top up their UK state pension from abroad? What do you think expats should do now that the changes come into effect in April 2026?
Really, really easy. First thing to do is work out if you do have a gap, and that's very simple. I'm sure you'll be able to help any of your clients to do that.
Yeah.
If they've got any gaps at all, then frankly they should make the contributions, and as long as they do it before April, they're fine. Just to illustrate how beneficial it is, for every year that you top up, it's going to cost you about £180.
Yeah.
Right, and for that £180, you will get about £330 a year. So if you see that calculation, it's in about 7 months you've got your money back. And then you will have that for basically as long as you live.
Yeah.
As we've said, it is the best investment anyone can ever make. Albeit you could argue the numbers are small, but you should still do it.
Yeah, yeah. So there really is that deadline then to get it done by April.
Absolutely. And the reality is you can do it online. You can do it in your lunch break.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
So add that to the to-do list then.
Totally.
Yeah. And when you look at the pension changes coming in from 2027 alongside the national insurance reforms for expats, how do these two areas connect, kind of more from a long-term financial planning perspective?
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a massive amount of crossover connection there, because as we've already said, frankly, if you haven't got 35 years, then it's an absolute no-brainer to do it.
Yeah.
That is very, very different from the other changes that are coming in 2027, which are, I mean, for some people quite traumatic. You're talking about effectively taking your entire unused pension and making it subject to inheritance tax.
Yeah.
And if you've got cure-ops, you could be paying even more tax than 40%. So I think the only crossover is, because this will fundamentally impact the way people choose to deaccumulate. Because before it's a case of, if you've got pensions, then keep them, because it's a fantastic way of passing monies down to the next generation. Now, not so much. Now, actually, it's almost flipped on its head, and you want to draw your money. So I'd say the only connection between those two is if you have maximised and you're getting full state pension, it just gives you more options when it comes to deaccumulation.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's move on to inheritance tax a little bit more then, because that was a real pain point, I think, in the last budget. And let's also talk about income thresholds. Now, inheritance tax thresholds will remain frozen for another 3 years, right? How do you think this affects British expats and other internationally mobile individuals?
Yeah, I mean, the allowances and exemptions have been frozen for quite some time now. The Conservatives frozen for a while. We've now got them frozen for another 3 years at a really straightforward, simplistic level that everyone will understand. By freezing the exemptions and the bans, what you're doing effectively is you will draw more people into paying tax. And those people that were already into that will simply pay more tax because their assets have increased. Yeah. I mean, the whole point of freezing exemptions and rates is what you do is you effectively collect more tax by stealth. And because even by inflation, people's assets will grow. And all that growth will now, of course, fit into those exemptions that haven't moved. So, yes, at a very simple level, more people will be drawn in, more people will be at higher rates, more people will pay more tax.
Yeah. Not great news then for a lot of people.
No.
And
well, actually, not great news for their beneficiaries.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And many internationally mobile families use trusts or offshore structures to help with inheritance tax planning. With the 2025 budget changes, including the new £5 million trust charge cap that was included in the small print of the budget, how are these structures going to be treated now? And what are some things that expats should look out for?
So prior to last year's budget, if you are what's called a non-domicile, you're able to set up what was called an excluded property trust. It was called an excluded property because excluded property is any assets that are just not and will never be subject to UK IHT. An excluded property trust, therefore, by its nature, is a trust that has excluded property in. Now, what happened in the budget is that they did something that they quite often do in order to have retrospective taxation, which is to what they say called grandfathering.
Yeah.
But they didn't grandfather every aspect of these trusts. So anyone who's got these existing trusts, and you're absolutely right, a lot of people have these, and quite rightly were advised to set them up.
Yeah.
The settlor on his or her death, they are still exempt from inheritance tax.
Okay.
So that's the good news.
Yeah.
The not quite so good news is that if the settlor returns to the UK and becomes a long-term resident, then that trust becomes subject to what is called the periodic charge. And that's just a charge on the trust itself of up to 6%.
Right.
It's actually 6% minus the nil rate band.
Okay.
Quite common planning is to have a number of different trusts because that way each trust has its own nil rate band and therefore the actual amount you pay is less.
Yeah.
The 5 million, I have no idea where that came from, and it's a weird number. I say weird because the 5 million is the maximum amount you can pay as a periodic charge. Well, if you do the maths on that, if the charge is 6% and the cap is 5 million, your trust has to exceed 83.3 million in order for that cap to be of any benefit whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure you've got lots of clients with that sort of money, but the reality is that's not the average size of an excluded property trust.
Definitely not.
So, as I said, no idea where it came from. It's not going to be much help to most people.
Got you. Yeah, fair enough. And what's the biggest misconception that you see amongst expats when it comes to inheritance tax planning, especially those who kind of have, maybe they think that living abroad automatically removes them from UK inheritance tax?
Well, in fairness, if they've been here or abroad for 10 years, they are removed from inheritance tax. I think the probably most common misconceptions are I'm now not resident in the UK. I don't pay any inheritance tax at all, whereas actually they will, of course, pay inheritance tax on what we call UK citus assets. Mm-hmm. And that also includes property that's been put into foreign companies, because there was some anti-avoidance back in 2017 that stopped that. So they will still pay inheritance tax if they've got UK citus assets. Another common one is that because of the changes last year, you can't use UK trusts anymore for IHT. Couldn't be more wrong. Under the new long-term residency rules, if you actually set up a trust while you're non-long-term resident, not only will those assets be excluded from inheritance tax, they'll be excluded even if you return to the UK. The other probably most common misconception, I'm not quite sure where this comes from, is that people still think the 7-year rule applies if they make a gift while they're non-resident.
Right.
Now, if you're not a long-term resident and you make a gift, it's exempt, immediate, and nothing would change that. It doesn't matter what the settlor does after that time. So for me, those are probably the three most common misconceptions.
That one's a really big one because, yeah, you're right. I think everyone still thinks that the 7-year gifting rule is applicable to them.
Yeah, no,
So
certainly not.
That's a nice little piece of information to leave with today then. And just talking about expats that will obviously eventually repatriate back to the UK, maybe we have some clients that are thinking of retiring to the UK in the next few years. How do you think these new measures should change their kind of planning landscape? And how quickly could they actually become exposed to UK inheritance tax again under the new residence rules?
There's been a lot written about it, and it'd be easy to look at it and think, really, that's really complicated. But the truth is that if you've been non-resident for 10 years, then you can do all sorts. Not only can you do all sorts of planning, but you are going to still be not liable to inheritance tax, i.e., you're still going to be considered a non-resident for 10 years after you return, because it's 10 years in 20. If you haven't been non-resident for 10 years, then as soon as you go back, you are going to be liable. It is as simple and as cliff-edged as that. So I think if anyone's on a 9-year contract, I would say, go on holiday for a year.
Yeah.
You deserve it, and it will benefit you hugely.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice because that's something that a lot of our clients didn't have to take into consideration previously, and it was one of the biggest changes, I think, from the last budget. Now, given all these shifts that we've discussed today, what are the key planning steps that expats should be taking now to protect their estate, for example, whether they intend to stay overseas or eventually return to the UK?
Well, if you're talking about IHT, if they never intend to return to the UK, then realistically, unless they have a liability now, they probably don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
For those people who are going to, then, as I said, as long as they've done the 10 out of 20, they can make absolute gifts, they can actually put things in trust. And the reality is, all I think they need to do is keep it simple. First of all, decide if you want to make a gift. Then decide if you do the level of control you want over that gift. And then decide, actually, when do I want to do it from a timing perspective? I've already mentioned the fact that if you use a trust, then it becomes subject to a periodic charge. What that means in practice is if you want to make a gift and you think, actually, I would like some control, because if I give it to my son and my daughter, they might waste it, use it inappropriately or whatever, then the reality is you should probably do the trust just before you come back to the UK. But what would be important is to make an investment that is not only suitable for a trust, but then could be moved into a trust very easily. So I think that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. And if you had to give our listeners one piece of financial advice about navigating the tax changes ahead, what would it be?
Don't Google it.
Yeah.
No. What would it be? There's lots of information out there. Clearly, they should take advice. There are huge opportunities for non-residents. I think people should remember last year that expats and non-residents were by far the biggest winners of the budget. And as you alluded to earlier, there are lots of people who are still thinking about it, deciding what to do. Biggest piece of advice, therefore, I can take is take advice.
And take action.
And take action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that, Tony. brilliant insights, as you always have. And thanks for breaking it all down for us. Now, to our listeners, the Autumn Budget 2025 brings real changes that will affect your pensions, your property, your tax position, and ultimately your long-term financial future. And my key takeaway from this conversation is that although there weren't so many huge changes to this recent budget, there wasn't any doubling down on the previous budget announcements, which is why it's really important to seek financial advice, because everyone's situation is going to be different, and just be aware of what kind of taxes that you might be exposed to. Now, if you've heard anything today that raises a concern, speak with a financial advisor. A short conversation now can save you a lot of complexity and protect your future financial interests later. So take action. Review your plan, make sure you're protected and positioned for what's ahead. Tony, thank you again for your time today. And thanks to all of you for listening. And we'll see you in the next episode.